Focus on Abilities is brought to you by TIRR Memorial Hermann, redefining rehabilitation, removing barriers, re-enabling independence. In the ILRU Southwest ADA Center, promoting compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Welcome to Focus on Abilities, a program about issues affecting the lives of people with disabilities. I'm Lex Frieden. I'll be your host for today's program. I'm professor at the University of Texas Health Science Center at Houston, and I direct the Independent Living Research Utilization Program at TIRR Memorial Hermann. Today we have a very interesting program. It's going to talk about the ADA, and we'll also talk about the practice of occupational therapy. I have a question that we'll answer before the end of today's program, and that is, how many inches wide must a doorway be in a home to be in compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act? We'll answer the question before the end of today's program. Now, please stay tuned. We'll be right back with Focus on Abilities. You're watching Focus on Abilities on HTV. I'm Lex Frieden, and our guest today is Emily Potter. Emily is a occupational therapist at TIRR Memorial Hermann. Emily, you are a clinical coordinator, right?
Yes.
And in your capacity as clinical coordinator, you manage other OTs, coordinate the work they do on the floors with patients who have spinal cord injuries.
Yes.
Right now, you told me there's about 70 patients in the hospital with spinal cord injuries, or more?
I think right now probably about 60 or 70. Mm-hmm.
What kinds of things do you do in OT today? I know when I was a patient at TIRR many years ago, I was a little frustrated with some of the tasks that I was given to accomplish. What do you do now with patients?
Well, we go in and we assess the patient and we say, what are the challenges that this patient is facing? And our ultimate goal is to find out, what does a day in the life look like for this patient? What do they need to do every day when they leave our care? What is their job? What is their occupation? Are they a mom? Are they a dad? Do they need to raise the children? Do they need to go back to work? Do they need to do their hobbies, go fishing, go skiing, all these things? So once we get a picture of who this person is and what they need to be able to do to have a good quality of life, then we come back and say, okay, your challenges are that you have no use of your legs at this time. How can we get you back to being as independent as possible in your life and get you back to doing those things that are important to you?
So the first job you do then is kind of an evaluation, and you try to get in the patient's head and make them become a problem solver early on, right? Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. They have to be part of the team. They have to come with their goals and tell us what's important to them. And then we work together to get them back to doing what they need to be able to do.
That must be hard for some patients when you say, what are your goals? And here they are, their whole life has been disturbed by this injury they've had. Do you get a lot of patients kind of pushing back and saying, you know, I'm barely alive, I'm glad to be alive, but I can't imagine what I might do?
Absolutely, and so that's why we have to kind of be a coach or their cheerleader, and we have to kind of talk to their family, talk to their friends, and then put together that picture of what we think is the right direction for them, and then put together these activities and get them out of that bed, get them moving, and then we can start, once they start participating, we can start to feed off of them and decide what's the next best step. But we know that they need to eat. We know that they need to be able to dress themselves. We know that they need to be able to get out of the bed, get in the bathtub, get you know, these everyday life activities that everybody needs to be able to do. And once we get them out of that bed and start doing those things, then we get to know our patient and we find out what's important to them. And then we can add in their hobbies and what their employment is going to look like and getting them back towards that.
So you start with very basic tasks of daily living. I mean, I think a lot of people, when they think about rehabilitation, they think about recovery from a serious injury or accident or illness. They kind of disregard some of those basic tasks. They make the assumption that a patient is going to be able just to start where they left off, except perhaps with some mobility assistance. But in reality, tying your shoes as a person who uses a wheelchair or a person with some other kind of physical impairment is a whole lot different than tying your shoes before that happened to you.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think whenever a lot of patients come in and their family members, when they come into rehab, they have a picture of, we're going to be doing exercise. And if they feel like if they're not in the middle of the gym doing some sort of strengthening activity, then they're not doing their rehab. But if you can't tie your shoes and you can't get your pants on or you can't get in the bathtub yet, then it's got to be both. It's got to be both to be able to get a good recovery and get back to living your life every day.
Okay, well, I mean, you went right there. When I broke my neck and went to TIRR in 1968, I was really frustrated in occupational therapy and thought I was wasting my time because I wasn't doing exercises in the typical sense of the word. And it didn't occur to me that some of the tasks that I was doing were in fact exercises. They were exercising muscles that I might not think of exercising or might not be typical for exercising in physical therapy. But these were little hand and finger and wrist and shoulder and neck movements that are, you know, used in the jobs that you do or the tasks that you perform in everyday living that are maybe different from those you use in lifting weights.
Right.
And but it never occurred to me, and the thing that frustrated me most was, this is 1968, right? And so the therapist explains to me that I have to learn these tasks of daily living, and one of them was dialing the telephone. But the only telephone they had there was an old rotary dial telephone. And I was so frustrated because here I am practicing dialing this rotary dial telephone when we already had push button telephones, even in the 1968. So I don't know, do you still use gadgets and gimmicks and make patients do things that aren't part of their everyday life to mimic things?
I think, and this is the way that we train our teams now, is it has to be meaningful. If it's not meaningful to the patient, then they're not going to feel like they're recovering, you know. And it's very important. Why would you buy into that task if it wasn't important to you, and if you didn't see how that was going to translate into getting you more independent in your everyday life?
Okay.
So it has to be meaningful.
So if I were a patient today, I wouldn't have to do finger painting or try and, you know, paint on something, because I never have been a painter. I'm not interested in being a painter.
No,
and
we'd
therefore
find
I wouldn't
something
have
else.
to do that. Okay, fine.
We would find something else for you.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Maybe how to operate a Morse code key so that I could do my ham radio, right?
Mm-hmm. Or I see your phone right there, your touchscreen phone.
Yeah.
We'd get a tablet or an iPhone or something like that and have you get on that
All right, well, I'm glad we've made a lot of progress in rehabilitation. We'll come back and talk more about occupational therapy and also the changes that have occurred since I was a patient many years ago. Please stay tuned. You're watching Focus on Abilities on HTV. Welcome back to Focus on Abilities. I'm Lex Frieden, and we're with Emily Potter. Emily is an occupational therapist at TIRR. And Emily, your influence on these patients as a provider of services, but also as a role model, has to be profound. You had a personal experience with disability. That's how you got in a wheelchair, right?
Yes. I was injured at 19 in a car accident. and broke my back at T12, the thoracic vertebra, lower back, so I'm paralyzed from the waist down.
But you went through surgery, and then you went through rehabilitation. You had a good experience in rehab. You liked the people who were treating you, felt like everything you did was relevant, and were motivated to become an occupational therapist.
I was. I actually worked today with one of the OTs that worked with me when I was a patient, which is a great experience. So I did have a very positive experience in rehab. My therapists had a huge impact on my life. They just came alongside me at a very fragile point in my life and just helped me get to be independent and moving towards the next phase, which I am so appreciative of.
Well, I think the field of OT has really evolved over the last couple of decades, really. I mean, you have more tools, you have more technology that you can use. People in the preparation process and the training and the education are focused more on relevance for the patient, and you've talked about that. Are there any really exciting trends in OT right now that you can talk about?
I think assistive technology is very exciting at this time, especially for our tetraplegic population. I think
tetraplegic means
higher
we
level.
used to say quadriplegic.
Exactly.
People who have their arms and legs affected by their paralysis.
Yes. So I think technology is so huge. Now that we have all of these touchscreen phones and iPads and access to computers is really changing life for these individuals because it gives them access to their environment. So before, you may have a really hard time using a phone with buttons. Well, now you have a touch screen, and that allows people to get back to work because there's a lot of employment opportunities with computers. So that, I feel like that's a huge area that is exciting to me.
What about speech to text and voice activated technology?
Yes, and nowadays computers have built-in accessibility options already built in so that you can use an on-screen keyboard if you have a hard time using the keypad. Just so many options there.
You probably have a hard time remembering when computers didn't have built-in technology, but I can tell you that in my life, one of the greatest changes have been, and improvements as far as living with a disability, has been the advent of accessible technology. And I mean, we didn't have computers when I was hurt. We didn't have them at all. And then, 15 years later, I actually got one of the first computers because I thought it would be really, really great, and it was very basic, but it actually was assistive technology for me. And later on, I've tried to keep up, although things move so quickly now, it's hard to do that.
Oh, I bet.
What about robotics?
Robotics, that's exciting too, allowing someone that doesn't have use of their legs or use of their arms to stand when they haven't stood in maybe years.
But do you think there are other implications for the development of and use of robots to help people? Do you think that robots will replace human beings? Do you think there'll be robot therapists at some point?
Ooh, I don't know. That's something to think about, but I think there's a huge use for them in, we're already using them for range of motion and getting circulation in legs and weight bearing through legs when you're not able to stand. Using them for upper extremity, I think that they could be used for retraining the neural pathways, for someone that has a hard time moving their arm through their full range of motion. You could use a robot to help them, with as much help they need to make the movement, but help complete the movement.
So I guess one of the other big improvements that I've seen in the practice of therapy in rehabilitation is the integration of occupational and physical therapy. They used to be, I mean, even in our hospital, there used to be a wall between the two. Oh. The therapists used to wear different color uniforms depending on whether they were OTs or PTs. Now, that's all gone.
Yes.
Therapy's integrated now, and sometimes you can't even tell if the person who's treating you is a PT or an OT. Used to be a lot of distinctions, and now it's really amalgamated itself to the point where I think patients receive much better care than they used to.
And I think it's essential. You know, I'm thinking about yesterday, I scheduled a co-treat between physical therapy and occupational therapy because they had a patient that was going to be doing a bathing evaluation, so using a bathtub like he would use at home with the equipment that he's going to use because he's getting ready to go home. And so the PT and the OT worked together. The PT really focused on how was the patient going to transfer into the bathtub. And the OT then worked while the patient was in the bathtub, how was he going to bathe himself? And after it got done, or after he finished bathing, then how was he going to dress afterwards? So it was all in one session, and each discipline brought very important,
different skills
to the task.
So Emily, I want to find out from you what impact do you think the Americans with Disabilities Act has had on rehabilitation, on occupational therapy, and on the lives of our patients. I'll ask you that question when we get back. Please stay tuned. We're coming back with Emily Potter in just a second. I'm Lex Frieden. You're watching Focus on Abilities on HTV, and we're here today with Emily Potter. Emily, your experience as a wheelchair user is recent in many respects. Compared to me, I guess you were injured in 2000, and you've had the opportunity to adapt to the community, to adapt to the environment fairly well. Have you faced a lot of barriers in that adaptation process?
As far as the Americans with Disabilities Act?
Well, no, just generally. I mean, when you went to school in San Antonio, did you have trouble finding an apartment or a dorm or a place to live that was accessible for you when you moved back to Houston? What was your experience?
I think finding an apartment was, I did have some challenges there, just making sure that I found an apartment that was built at a time where they made all of the first floor apartments accessible with with no small doorways inside. So I had to find one that didn't have the smaller bathroom doors and no steps to enter. So
did somebody counsel you about that? You said you had to find one that was built since they were making those accommodations in the first floor. How did you learn that at some point apartments were built according to a different standard?
Well, I didn't, because I had been through school and, you know, learned about the Americans with Disabilities Act, I knew that there was a standard. And then just through talking, as I started to look for apartments, I heard, I don't remember who told me, but they said some apartments have started to build all of their first floors to where they are accessible, meaning that they have doorways that are 36 inches wide, following the ADA guidelines. So I found an apartment that did that. But as far as access, I feel like I've been very fortunate because I was injured at a time where things are accessible. Because of the ADA, things have been very accessible. So going around town, going to the grocery store, going to everywhere that most people go, going to a concert, hanging out with friends, going to the mall, I can get there. I can get inside, and I can get in the doorways. There are ramps to be able to access.
Do you still find times at which, though, you're frustrated? Do you ever find yourself in a restaurant where you can't get to an accessible bathroom, or a shopping center where you don't know where the accessible bathroom is, or you can't find the handicap parking or something of that nature?
Yes, I like to go with my family members. Some of them like to go antique shopping, and so some of these smaller little towns that are very cute and, you know, have rows of shopping, that were built before there were the guidelines, well then I can't access them. So they may have very tiny doorways, or they have several steps to enter with no ramp. And so when I go shopping with my family, they go in those stores and I end up just kind of waiting until they get done with that shop, which I wish I could go with them, so there's still room to grow there, room for improvement.
Do you think you should be able to get in those historical shops?
I wish I could. I sure do wish I could.
That's kind of a dilemma that we had to work through when we worked on the Americans with Disabilities Act, because some older buildings and proprietors would argue, well, it costs too much, and then they got into this thing about, well, it's historical, we can't change the history by rebuilding it according to modern standards. And that's still a bit of a debate, but I think we're beginning to convince the people that make decisions, and policymakers and others, that you can maintain your history and photographs and videos and stories, but you really should provide access to all. And otherwise it's discrimination.
Right. In order for someone to be a functional member of society, then I feel like they need the access to society. And I feel like that is a benefit to society, because then that person is able to give back in a larger way.
Are there things that you warn your patients about when they get back out into the community? You coach them on finding accessible apartments by looking for those buildings that are relatively new and have the accessible or adaptable housing on the bottom floor, other kinds of things like that?
Yes, we talk about things like that. We educate about travel. So patients that are going to be traveling, how are you going to get on an airplane? How are you going to protect your skin, because you are a wheelchair user who sits for long periods of time? How are you going to protect your skin while you're riding on a long car ride? How are you going to get in and out of the car? So we problem solve all of these things to prepare them for.
Do you tell them what to do if they run into a barrier they think shouldn't be there?
Yes.
What do they do?
We tell them to get involved in writing the lawmakers, talk to your legislature, talk to your representative, speak your mind and
tell them to call 1-800-949-4232.
Okay.
And that's the technical assistance number for ADA. So,
wonderful.
And we actually operate that from TIRR. It's the ADA Technical Assistance Line, and it's 1-800-949-4232. The patients that we have, I think, do have the opportunity to look forward to a society and a community that's more welcoming as a result of the ADA, but I don't think all the issues have been solved. You probably still run into subtle discrimination. Sometimes you might not even recognize it. Mm-hmm. Have you ever felt like somebody was treating you differently because you used a wheelchair or had a disability?
Well, sure. I mean, I feel like the more confident that I was able to become with myself, once I learned what my abilities were and what I have to offer, I feel like other people were more comfortable around me, because I feel like when I first meet someone, that awkwardness almost is because they don't know how to approach me or how to speak with me. So I think I've come to understand that there's going to be that. But as far as someone being outright rude or unwelcoming, can't say unfortunately, I haven't experienced that.
That's good. Well,
that I can think of.
You certainly are a woman of confidence, and I want to thank you for being on our show today. We'll come back in a second and have some closing words. I want to thank all of you for watching Focus on Abilities, and we will take a break, but please stay tuned. We'll be right back. You're watching Focus on Abilities on HTV. At the beginning of today's program, we ask you, how many inches wide is a doorway that's covered under the standards of the Americans with Disabilities Act?
Should be 36 inches wide.
36-inch clearance, and I'll tell you, sometimes you have to search for those doorways in apartments. Mm-hmm. Thanks for being our guest today.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
Want to thank all of you for watching. Hope you tune in next time for more Focus on Abilities. I'm Lex Frieden, and thanks to HTV, we're producing this program at the City of Houston. Please join us again next time.
Focus on Abilities was brought to you by TIRR Memorial Hermann, redefining rehabilitation, removing barriers, re-enabling independence, and the ILRU Southwest ADA Center, promoting compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act.